I'm totally willing to close the border, but Mexico, of the last 4 days, has done more than they've ever done. They're apprehending people now by the thousands and bringing them back to their countries.
If they continue that, everything will be fine. If they don't, we're going to tariff their cars at 25% coming into the United States.
Let's bring in our panel now. Byron York, he's the chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Molly Hemingway, the senior editor at The Federalist, and Charles Lane, opinion writer for The Washington Post and author of the new book, Freedom's Detective, which comes out on Tuesday. So the president, and we talked about this yesterday on the panel, taking a little bit different tack, saying not going to close the border right away. Mexico's been doing some good things. If it continues to do those good things, we're good for a year, and if not, then I'm going to impose tariffs on cars. Is this a strategy, Byron, that'll work?
He is trying to get some sort of traction on this. I mean, there is an actual, real, genuine emergency on the border. The Border Patrol apprehended 100,000 people trying to cross illegally in the month of March. That gets to about 1 million a year, which gets you back to the bad old days of the mid-2000s. But Democrats are still calling it a fake emergency, and the things that he needs to do, like changing our asylum situation and dealing with this large number of people coming over, not trying to avoid detection, but just turning themselves over to the Border Patrol, he can't get anything done right now, which is one of the reasons he was promoting the sections of barrier that they actually have built, quite a few miles of that.
The president says, Molly, that he's getting Mexico to act through the threats that he has been issuing about closing the border in the last few days. But will Congress ever act on this?
Well, that's what I think is interesting. People are very much focused on what the president is saying and what the president is threatening. But they also get upset when he acts unilaterally and doesn't have the support of Congress. We really do have a crisis. Congress did not want to address it seriously this year during the shutdown. They haven't wanted to address it seriously for the past several decades. This is not just a Democrat problem or a Republican problem. This is a bipartisan failure that goes back decades. So it sounds like Donald Trump is saying a bunch of crazy stuff, shutting down the border, tariffs and whatnot. What a lot of people think is crazy is that nobody's actually doing anything to address the problem because the situation is fine. I mean, open borders policy is largely fine for a lot of the people who are elite, and so they don't feel the incentive to do anything. So I think a lot of these threats are about incentivizing people to finally make changes that they've been reluctant to do for decades.
There's one part of this that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and that is the president threatening tariffs against Mexico, because there is a side letter in the recently signed USMCA, which hasn't been ratified just yet, that says that the United States cannot impose tariffs on automobiles from Mexico or Canada up to the first 2.6 million under Section 232 national security, which I imagine this would be. But the president says that he's going to throw all of that out the window. Listen here.
This will supersede USMCA. USMCA is a great deal, and it's very good for Mexico, but this will supersede USMCA.
So, Charles, if you've got that side letter that says no tariffs on cars from Mexico, regardless of the circumstances, is he undercutting his whole trade deal that he's been touting?
Great question, John. Of course, the trade deal has not yet been approved by Congress, and at last time I checked, and I checked relatively regularly, it's not making great progress through Congress. Like many other things, including immigration policy itself, it is held hostage to total bipartisan or partisan deadlock on the Hill. And to pick up on what Byron and Molly have been saying about Congress, you know, it's not just that they can't come to an agreement, it's not just that they have differences. Those differences are widening. The partisan differences are widening through this crisis, such that now Julian Castro, who is one of the candidates for the Democratic nomination, has just come out with his immigration plan, which is a very anti-enforcement plan, which he is sort of planting the flag around that, and that is becoming the new kind of position on the Democratic Party. So you're going to have, like, over here the Republican position is build a wall, and over here the Democratic position is not exactly abolish ICE, but soften ICE, and it becomes harder and harder to see how we're going to get to that bipartisan compromise, which everybody at least used to think is what we needed.
It's been an intractable problem for decades and continues to be. Let me switch gears here, because we got a new development on the Ways and Means Committee petitioning the IRS for 6 years of the president's tax returns. In a letter from William Consovoy, who's the president's latest addition to his outside legal team, to the Treasury Department addressing Section 6103 of the IRS tax code, William Consovoy writes, quote, "While that section allows Ways and Means to obtain tax returns and return information under certain conclusions, the committee's authority is subject to important constraints. These constraints extend to the ordinary taxpayer and the president alike." He goes on to say his request is a transparent effort by one political party to harass an official from the other party because they dislike his politics and speech. What's going to happen here, Byron? Will Ways and Means get these tax returns?
Well, it's going to go to the courts. I think the first thing you need to say is this is actually a fishing expedition. That's the fact below all this. The question the courts are going to have to decide is whether the Democrats have to say they have a legitimate legislative purpose in getting these tax returns, which is why when you saw the letter from Richard Neal to the IRS, he talked about reforming and streamlining and improving the audit process. So they need to see the president's tax returns to make their audit process better. Now, will courts buy that? I don't know, but it's going to be settled by judges.
How do you predict this will go, Molly?
Well, there's a legal battle, but there's also a political battle. And I think that you saw the president reframe some of these fishing expeditions as presidential harassment. There's a general view that maybe going for impeachment would not help Democrats against the president. He's sort of bucketing it all together, whether they go for impeachment or not. Just this level of presidential harassment, he's trying to say this is unfitting for him to have to deal with. They could do a lot, and I generally think Congress has the right to go for what it wants to go for, and that if people don't like it, they can take it out at the ballot box. But they need to make a better case for why they're going for this, and they haven't even tried.
To the border, we are awaiting President Trump to show up at Calexico, California. But before he left Washington, D.C. this morning, he did threaten a 25% tariff on all autos made in Mexico, whether they're from U.S. companies. These are cars made in Mexico, shipped to the United States. And he says this will, quote, supersede the new NAFTA or USMCA deal. Now, whether it does, Mexico's standing as our largest dairy export market is starting to look precarious and has the U.S. Dairy Export Council on tenterhooks. In a Fox Business exclusive, we have Council CEO and former Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack with us. As the president goes down to the border, how closely will be dairy farmers watching this?
Well, they were very concerned when he announced a disastrous strategy of closing the border. $3.8 million of dairy products flow through that border every single day. This in light of 5 years of very depressed prices, retaliatory tariffs making it harder to get into our #1 market, and obviously deep concerns about whether or not we can get the ratification of USMCA done very quickly. So a lot going on that dairy farmers are very, very concerned about their #1 market and the U.S. position relative to that #1 market.
Now, what if the president were to keep trucking lanes open? There was that discussion of somehow allowing commerce to pass through what would be no longer a porous border.
Well, the other concern is that they've basically been transferring personnel from customs to immigration, which has slowed the process down at the border over the last several days. So even though lanes may be open, there may be a delay in getting product to market. All of this is designed, I think, to create some uncertainty at the border. Obviously, that creates friction. What we don't need in this trade relationship is more friction. What we need is a resolution of the difficulties separating the two countries on the tariffs and a passage of the USMCA.
It's important to mention, though, that the president has scrapped what he threatened last week, which was, I'm closing the border by the end of this week if Mexico doesn't do anything about the stream of illegal migrants coming across the border. He has backed down from that, and GOP senators like Mitch McConnell, like John Cornyn of Texas, begged him, please don't go through with this threat. What about the tariffs, though? That doesn't have anything to do with the dairy market. So if he slapped tariffs on cars, how do you perceive something like that?
Well, that impacts the relationship between the two countries and makes it potentially more difficult for Mexico to pass the kind of labor reforms that are central to the ability of our Congress to get the USMCA passed. I mean, this is all intertwined. It's a complex relationship, and I think it's unfortunate that we look for simplistic responses. If we really are truly concerned about the border, what we need is comprehensive immigration reform. We obviously need enhanced border security, and we need some kind of plan to ensure that the economies south of our border are healthier so that people don't feel the need to come to the United States for opportunity for their families.
Tom, back in the days of the Gang of Eight, which was bipartisan and actually got, I believe, the Senate to vote on a comprehensive immigration plan that was centrist and it was rational, it doesn't seem like the Democrats are open to much of anything when it comes to that, and the Republicans, quite frankly, have dug in their heels on certain issues that matter to the Democrats. How do you get over something like this as our dairy industry, which exports a huge amount to Mexico, watches and bites their nails?
This is an incredibly frustrating situation because everybody in that capital knows what the solution is. They need the political courage to get it done. They need to be able to go back home and explain to folks that this is not about taking American jobs. This is about building an American economy that continues to be strong. It's about creating the same kind of opportunities that our forefathers have had in terms of building this country. The reality is everyone knows what the solution is. It takes political courage, and I think the rest of us have to essentially give our politicians permission to do the right thing on immigration.
If you had the president's ear, what would you say?
Mr. President, simplify the message. Let's not try to make more disruption here.
Okay, I don't mean to interrupt here, but I'm just hearing some of our viewers say, how much simpler is it? Please, Mexico, do your part in keeping this flow of migrants and, quite frankly, drugs, fentanyl, all kinds of problems from coming across so that we can ship our corn and dairy and pork and poultry across.
Here's the problem. The issue with drugs is primarily at the ports. It's not at the border. And so we're really talking about two different issues here. If we're truly interested about drugs, then we obviously have to enhance our security at the ports. It's not a situation where this stuff is being carried over in great quantities across the border. It's coming in through ships, through containers. And we only basically inspect a handful of containers every single day. So, you know, I think the president is basically trying to create a political messaging around a situation that actually has gotten better over time. And the reality is we need comprehensive immigration reform. Yes, enhanced border security has to be part of that, but it's only part of it. You've got to say something to the 11 million people who are here in this country. You have to provide some kind of pathway legitimacy for them. And you have to have a system that makes sense and is rational from this point forward. We don't have that because we don't have the courage in Congress and in the administration to get this done. Everybody knows what the answer is. Everybody knows what the answer is.
I hope both sides of the political aisle are at some point going to face each other and get this done. Tom Vilsack, former Agriculture Secretary, thank you for joining us.